This session is the neuroscience of care, redefining safety, belonging, and performance at work with our presenter, Stephanie Powell. So, Stephanie, please take it away. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So the neuroscience of care. I am Stephanie Powell, and I am a doctoral student currently at University of Arizona Global Campus. And so all of the ways that our our brain, our nervous system, all the ways that we respond and we naturally are wired, and how that affects us in organizational settings is really that's my lane, that's my jam, right? It's just figuring out and understanding how we can work with the brain instead of against it. And so for this specifically, what we're talking about is what care actually looks like to a nervous system, and why a lot of care initiatives miss the mark even when everybody's trying and they're doing their best, right? With the best of intentions. So most organizations, when we think about care initiatives, we're trying to care harder or care more. We do more programs, more surveys, maybe more wellness initiatives. But then we see that burnout is still climbing, engagement is still dropping, and we find that people are disengaging even in organizations that genuinely want to do better. And so we're treating care as a sentiment when it's actually a set of conditions. We can have the best of intentions, the strongest values, and even the most compassionate leadership, but we can still actually be activating the threat responses in the people around us. So what we have to understand about the brain is it does not respond to what we mean or what we intend. It responds to what it detects, or it responds to the pieces of evidence that it has available. So good intentions without the right conditions can still register as threat. Our nervous system is constantly scanning the environment for threat and for safety cues, right? And that's something that we do subconsciously because the brain's number one job is to keep us safe. It's not performance, it's not metrics, it's not creativity or innovation, it's safety. And so what's happening is we're constantly scanning for those threats. We're also logging pieces of evidence that show us when something is safe versus maybe when it is not, right? And this is something that we refer to as neuroception. Our nervous system is reading cues of safety or threat. Again, it's below your conscious awareness, and it doesn't read intentions. It picks up on patterns. And this is where we find that most of those care initiatives can break down. So we have to understand too that belonging is not a feeling. We think of it that way, but belonging is really a biological state. And once again, because the brain is wired to keep us safe, that belonging aspect is very, very, very important. Because if we go back to caveman hunter-gatherer days, if we didn't belong, if we were not a part of a group or a tribe, being alone ultimately meant death. So this belonging and why that matters so much to us, that's a big part of it, right? So when we have enough evidence, when our brain has enough evidence logged that gives us evidence of safety and significance, then the brain can shift into a state where that performance really does become possible. So this, and it's not soft science or just a cool idea. This is actually the neuroscience behind high performance. So what happens when the brain starts to feel safe? One, now creativity can come online. The prefrontal cortex becomes more available for complex thinking, problem solving, and innovation. Our collaboration can be activated. Social engagement circuits open up, and we can have that genuine connection and co-creation because once again, the brain says, okay, we're safe here, so we can do this. Our risk tolerance increases. We learn that we can, and we believe that we can try and we can fail and we can learn without the nervous system sounding all the alarms for all of the threat detection. And then memory consolidates. This is where the learning can actually stick. Because if the brain isn't worried about keeping us safe or addressing what it perceives to be as a threat, Now we can learn the retention improves because the brain has all of the energy focused there. We haven't actually taken part of the energy from the nervous system to manage whatever threat it might be picking up on. And what we have to understand and always remember is that we cannot get innovation, honest feedback, or adaptive thinking from a nervous system that is actively managing threat. What we can get is compliance and survival behavior, but not contribution. So when care breaks down, even when everyone's trying, and this is something that I think that we see quite a bit. Again, it's with the best of intentions, but we have to remember that most leaders are not creating threat on purpose. Most systems are not designed to harm, but systems create that friction through gaps between what's intended and what is actually experienced. So it's not about bad people or bad leaders. It's really about invisible conditions, right? It's about these structural patterns that quietly undermine safety, even inside organizations that genuinely care. We see typically 3 recurring breakdowns, right? We see an information gap, an accountability gap, and a reciprocity gap, or that's what I call them, right? And each one activates the threat response in a way that leaders and that we rarely see coming. So gap number 1, what I call the information gap. This is when the brain is guessing. Okay, so when we lack context for decisions, changes, or expectations, the brain fills that void with the worst case scenario. And it's not about paranoia. It's just neuroception in the nervous system doing its job. The brain treats ambiguity as a threat, not an inconvenience. So one of my favorite examples is when we think about vague emails, and maybe it was just a, hey, there are upcoming changes, or I was actually in public education for 13 years, and that email that we would get from the principal that would say, come see me. And that was the only thing it said. And that instantaneous, because there's no context and you're like, oh shoot, what did I do? What's happening? It's got to be bad, right? Whenever we experience that and that stomach drops, it's not because the news is bad. We don't know what the news is. And that's the whole point. That uncertainty alone triggers a protection or a threat response. So how we can shift this and start to close that gap, leading with context, right? It's not just sharing more information, but again, it's the context that we share. We're sharing why something is happening, what it means for the other person, and when they will know more. The context closes the gap that the brain's trying to fill on its own. And it doesn't mean that we have to say everything in an email that completely negates the need for a personal meeting. But I also at one point worked at a creative design firm, and the owner was really empathetic to what for me, when I say like, come see me, those types of emails, and how it would stress everybody out. So the simplest thing of adding the context of, hey, come see me, just need a project update. Or, hey, come see me, it's a good thing. Hey, come see me, it's not bad. Even just that teeny tiny bit of context until we can fill in all of the information can make such a huge difference for the brain and for the nervous system. So gap number 2, the accountability gap. The brain is always watching. It is always pulling evidence. It is always clocking everything. And it's watching not just what we say, it's watching what people do. And if there's an inconsistency between the words that we use and the actions, then the brain, once again, it registers that inconsistency as threat, even if that mismatch is super subtle. Again, it's not the words, the brain is registering and it's picking up on the patterns. So for example, if we're in an organization and we say feedback is welcome, but maybe we respond defensively or dismissively, the brain picks up on that. And what the brain then logs that as, okay, so it's actually not safe. We don't really want feedback. If it says, we value balance and, we want to honor your time, But maybe you get an email at 11 p.m., which is not a problem, but there's the expectation of a reply, right? I have worked with so many different individuals where I may say to them, hey, you might get an email from me at 9 or 10 o'clock in the evening. Please know I don't expect you to reply to me until normal business hours, right? That gap between stated values and the lived behavior, that is what starts to very silently but very real erode like that psychological safety, which, and if you're not familiar with that, psychological safety is the belief that we can speak up, push back, make mistakes, ask questions without fear of any sort of a negative consequence. So what the brain needs, we don't need perfect leaders, and there are no perfect leaders because there are no perfect people, right? But what we do need is we need consistent leaders. And when there is a misfire, and there absolutely will be, then we need active and intentional repair. So repair is some of the most powerful safety evidence that a nervous system can receive. And this is actually, we can think about it this way. In the marketing world, we talk a lot about positive and negative like feedback and reviews. And what's interesting is from a marketing perspective, when we look at the psychology behind marketing, you are actually far more likely to be loyal to a brand that made a huge mistake, but came back and fixed it really well and addressed it than we are if it's a brand that never makes a mistake at all. They may have perfect service, right? But what ends up happening is when someone makes a mistake or they mess up and then they make it right, that's what really solidifies. And we're like, you know what? They really own that. They took accountability and they really did, they did right by us. And it's the same way when we're talking about leaders. We're going to make mistakes, and being able to repair that, to own that, to say, hey, you know what? I said this thing and then I did this, and that's not what I intended to do. And I'm going to work on that. And I just appreciate you guys being patient with me and working through that with me, right? It's just the acknowledgement. And again, that is some of the most powerful evidence that we can give a nervous system. So that is the shift, right? It's naming that miss. It's saying, I told you guys that I wanted feedback, and when you started to give it to me, I didn't respond very well. That's on me. I still want the feedback, and I'm going to respond better. That sentence closes that gap more effectively than any policy or anything else that we could put into place. And the beautiful part about that too is, it just reminds people that we're leading, that we're human too. We are just like them. We are no better and no worse. And it starts to set up evidence to give them not only the belief that they can give feedback and it's safe, but that they can make mistakes too, because they've seen us do it. They've seen us make the mistake. They've seen us, say, hey, I got to name this. I got to call it out right. And it gives them that permission and that confidence to do the same thing. And gap number 3, the reciprocity gap. The brain has gone completely silent at this point. So this is that quiet withdrawal. And where we see this most is when contributions go unacknowledged. So maybe we ask for feedback and feedback is given, but then that feedback just sort of disappears into a void. Or there's effort that goes completely unregistered. What the nervous system learns is it learns to stop contributing. Maybe not completely, but maybe we were going the extra mile and we pull back just a little bit. And it's not because people stop caring. But what our brain and our nervous system has decided is this isn't worth the risk, right? And we don't show up one day and say, hey, everybody, this is a meeting. We're checking in. I want to announce I am no longer contributing. We just find that people start to get quieter. And typically what happens is by the time we notice the silence, that slow or incremental withdrawal has been happening for months, right? So the shift, we close the loop. Even if the answer is incomplete, we still close the loop. So if a piece of feedback is given, or maybe we've asked for something and we haven't gotten a result or a response yet, even just the acknowledgement of, I 100% hear you, I am still working on that. I will try to have an update for you, or here's where you can have an update. And maybe that update is, I still don't have anything for you, and I am working on that, but I just want to keep that consistent communication with you. A closed loop tells the brain your contribution's registered, you exist in this system, and it is safe for you to keep contributing. This single habit, super simple, but when it's practiced consistently, it can rebuild the reciprocity that the nervous system needs to stay engaged, because it does need that reciprocity, right? And reciprocity, not from the perspective of, I'll give you this if you give me this, right? The reciprocity of, I am putting forth effort, and somehow what I am giving is being acknowledged, received, appreciated, registered, something to that effect, right? So what we have to do, we have to stop trying to fix people and start fixing conditions. So when someone disengages, I think most of us, the instinctive response is, what's wrong with them, right? Or what's happening with them. And when we frame things that way, we're leading to something in the area that categorizes it as performance management, right? So we look at coaching plans, interventions, and it's all aimed at that individual person. But here's the thing. If the conditions are activating a threat response, then fixing the person changes nothing, because the person really didn't need to be fixed in the first place, right? If the conditions are what's activating the threat response, the nervous system is going to keep reacting to those exact same signals, right? So what we have to do is we have to reframe it. Yeah. We have to think and go, okay, what is that? Instead of what's wrong with the person or what's happening, what is their nervous system responding to? Behavior is always going to be data. That does not mean that all behavior should be excusable, encouraged, celebrated, but it still is all data. And we are very quick to label behavior as defiance or laziness or attitude. And it very well might come across that way, but it's still data. And so when we shift from judging the behavior to actually reading it, that's when we can shift from not trying to fix people, but trying to fix the conditions that they're in. And that's what a culture of care actually is. It's not a sentiment. It's not a program. It's not a poster on a wall. It's a set of conditions that give the brain enough evidence to safely move from protection to active contribution. So here's a diagnostic that you can use, immediately. And I'm a really, really big believer in, I think it's great when we hear from people and we get motivated and we get excited and energized. But if we don't have anything that we can actually do with that, eventually that motivation dies, right? Every fire eventually burns out. So instead it's, okay, that's great. How can we use it, right? So if you were to think about one relationship, one team dynamic, or just one recurring frustration, think about it and ask yourself, which gap might be open here? And here are the questions that we can ask, right? Is the brain guessing? If it doesn't have the context and it's just filling in the blanks, that's that information gap. And the way that we close that gap, or at least we narrow it, even if it's just a little bit, is we add the context. Yeah, we stop asking their brain to guess and we give them the information instead. We can ask, is the brain watching? So is it watching what we're saying and what we're doing and looking for those things to match up? That's the accountability gap, right? We have to, we've heard it our whole lives that actions speak louder than words. And that's just so true for the nervous system, right? So we either have to make sure that we're being consistent in what we say and following that up with what we're doing, or again, we repair the most recent miss openly, honestly, and specifically, right? We have to name the thing when it happens. And then the third one, we can also ask, has the brain just gone silent? Right? Have we noticed that somebody's been withdrawing more and more? That's that reciprocity gap, right? We want to acknowledge the contribution, confirm that their voice landed somewhere, even if it's just, again, I hear you, I don't have an answer, or I hear you, that's not going to be doable, but let me tell you why. Or, yes, that's a good suggestion. I don't know if we can accomplish that, but I'll check it out. Again, it's just the acknowledgement. We all, as human beings, we want to know that we belong and that our voices matter. We want to feel seen and heard. And we don't necessarily need everything that we suggest or say or want to be followed up on or actually like fulfilled. We just want to know that somebody goes, hey, I see you, I hear you. And here's the thing too, we're not going to close all three of these gaps, between now and Monday, right? That's just not realistic. But it's the teeny tiny shifts, they compound, right? And we close one gap or we narrow it a little bit. And then if we stay consistent and we look for the next gap and the next gap, that all is compound interest for the nervous system. And it logs at every single occurrence because the brain is constantly collecting evidence. And it takes time because really what we're doing here, when we close these gaps and when someone else's nervous system is collecting that evidence, we're now getting into neuroplasticity. So we're getting into rewiring neural pathways. Yeah? Our brain is very capable of change. Every time we have a new experience, learn something new, meet a new person, the brain is actively changing, right? And so if we think about if we needed to make a new highway, right? Okay, well, it's super easy to kind of demolish a highway, but it takes time to rebuild one. Yeah. We are big animal people in my house. And one of the dogs that we had previously would, every time we let them outside, they would patrol the fence line. And he did it so much that over time, not immediately, but about 3 months after being at that house that we were at, we started noticing a wear and the grass was dying around the fence line. And then eventually the grass was just gone. And it was because he ran in that same path over and over every single day. It didn't happen overnight, but eventually he carved out a little track for himself. And when we rewire neural pathways and we're talking about neuroplasticity, it's the exact same thing. And it takes those small shifts and that consistency, and it won't be overnight. But if we stick with it, the brain eventually starts going, I noticed this. And then I saw it again. And now I'm seeing it again. So maybe this is the thing. Maybe this is the new thing. And I am safe here. So a culture of care, it's never going to be about caring more, which is a beautiful sentiment, right? It truly is. But the brain has to be able to detect it. And to do that, we have to design conditions where the brain can detect that the care is already in place. So when we work with the brain instead of against it, now care stops being a value statement that, again, maybe is on a wall or is said in a meeting or is in the footer of an email, right? And it starts being a lived experience. And it starts being a lived experience in every interaction, every meeting, every email. And in practice, what we see is we're closing the information gaps with the context. We're not asking the brain to do the guesswork anymore. We're closing the accountability gaps with consistency and repair. And we're showing it, I'm going to do what I say I'm going to do. And if I don't, I'm going to recognize that and I'm going to repair it. And then we close the reciprocity gaps by acknowledging contributions. And again, it's just that you are seen, you are heard, you are valued here, which can sound kind of squishy and soft and meh for organizations, but the nervous system demands it. And these aren't just culture initiatives. These are neurological conditions for contribution. Because again, if the brain does not feel safe, innovation, performance, creativity, collaboration, all of those things, they may not go completely out the window, but we will never be able to see what we are capable of on an individual and an organizational level, because the brain and the nervous system have reserved the bulk of its resources to protection, right? So, done just a couple minutes early, but thank you. That is my neuroscience of care. If anyone here has any questions or any comments or anything like that, I would love to address them to the best of my ability. There is also a QR code on the screen that has my contact information. So if anything were to pop up, obviously, if you can't tell, like I said, this is what I do, live, breathe. So I can literally talk about this all day, every day. I always tell people, you will never, ever bother me if you ever reach out and have a question. That just means I get to nerd out with somebody else on brain science stuff, which is my favorite thing in the world. So I will close my mouth. And if anybody has any questions, please, 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 I would love to hear them.
Hey, Stephanie, I really enjoyed this presentation. Kind of nerded out with you a little bit. And I saw you're presenting this afternoon, so your afternoon presentation, maybe this will be a preview. I don't know. Are there ways where we can kind of hijack our own brains individually to make ourselves feel seen, heard, cared for in an environment where we may not have control over what other people do? And so what I'm saying, is there a way we can be proactive in building our own feelings of security in a situation where we may not have control over what others can do? So how can we be proactive in building in our own kind of calm and serenity?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And it's a sort of a good news, bad news answer, right? Because the reality of the situation is that when we're talking about organizational environments, I love your mug, sorry. Big Golden Girls fan. Yes. When we're talking about organizational and context and things like that, I mean, the reality of the situation is that, yes, we can try to sort of armor ourselves up a little bit, but only to a certain extent, because ultimately the brain and the nervous system's desire and borderline demand for belonging, that means it does involve other people. You know what I mean? And so that's kind of the bad news part, is that to a certain extent, you know, we are a little bit reliant. The best thing that we can do for ourselves, particularly if we're in a situation where maybe it's not the safest and we are not being acknowledged or seen or whatever else, it's then doing a little bit of that inner work of reminding yourself and finding, again, the brain's all about evidence, right? It's like, show me the receipts. So finding evidence of, maybe it wasn't with this particular individual, but like, okay, but when I said this, this happened. Or when I contributed this over here and something different, this happened. Even something like, my friend called and I was able to counsel her on a problem and she said it was really helpful. All of those things, it's just reminding the brain of the wins that you do have. And really what you're doing is, at that point, because the brain can be kind of hard to trick sometimes not, but it just depends. And it's kind of that acknowledgement, literally almost having a conversation with your brain and going, look, I know this isn't the exact same thing, but before you decide that your contributions are worthless, let's acknowledge that when you did these things over here, it was very well received. So maybe in this context, it's not you. Maybe it's somebody else. And then we can do things, and this actually maybe sounds a little bit counterproductive, but then it's about taking into account, like looking around the room and going, is this happening to other people too? Because chances are, if it's somebody that you can't control, the chances are, if you really observe that behavior, your brain's going to go, oh, well, this is happening to these people too. Or, oh, I'm seeing a favoritism issue going here. So maybe it really isn't about me. It's about this So those are the best things. It's just that awareness. It's just that being hyper aware and trying our best to look at it from that very, very logical, unemotional standpoint of, I know this is how I'm feeling. Let me take a look at what is happening and let me explore all of the potential possibilities. It could be that nobody cares that I'm here. It could be that that person's just having a really cruddy day. It could be, and I'll just call it what it is, maybe it's just not a very good person. You know what? And so again, it's taking the brain back and allowing it to pull the evidence that is outside that one interaction or that one instance. Does that make sense? And go, okay, you know what? When I really look at this and I look at this person, this actually isn't normal behavior for them. Or, you know what? When I look at them, they're kind of always rude and dismissive, no matter who it is. So, you know, it's things like that. But that's really the best that we can do, because again, ultimately, it's at a certain point, how other people are going to, that's we can only hijack and protect ourselves to a certain extent, if that makes sense.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your input.
Yeah, sure. Are any other questions?
Loving all of this, Stephanie. So it's funny because it's so true when something just clicks and you don't see it yourself. And for those who have been with UAGC for a long period of time, myself, 17 years prior Ashford, I immediately reverted back to our old days when we would get these emails and there's just no context, and my stomach would plummet and I get nervous. And I'm like, we've made so much progress, Tony, with the culture of care and everything. We're not there anymore. But I immediately thought about recent change we've been going through with our realignments and everything, and how I've been working with department heads. And I've noticed with certain people in meetings, my brain is like ideas, I'm talking, I'm contributing, and then there'll be other settings where I'm not totally familiar with the individuals and I don't know, I don't have that trust or that familiarity. So I know that I have ideas, but it's just not coming out. And now this is all just like, so I'm wondering if you're aware of this, right? And you start to go into these meetings, is there a way, kind of like an extension of what Dr. Myers was saying, maybe we can help rewire our brains if we're aware and like, oh, okay, I'm not talking right now because there's two people here I can't trust. How is there, or not that I can't, but I don't know if I can. How is there a way where we can ourselves, now that we identify that, work collaboratively to repair, or is it dependent upon the organization and leadership, if that makes sense?
It does. And you said something and you made a distinction that I want to call out. So there is a huge difference in, I don't know if I'm safe with this person and I know that I'm not. There are huge differences there, right? And so when it's just I don't know, I can really only speak from my personal experience, meaning, you know, sometimes we just got to put it out there and see what happens. You know what I mean? And I do think that sometimes, and we have to do what's authentic and true for us. I have a tendency to do this anyway. I blame it on the fact that I'm autistic and ADHD. So I preface things like crazy because I'm terrified of being misunderstood. Right. Mm-hmm. But I think sometimes when we preface things, I think what that does, depending on how we preface it, is it gives everyone else's brains, it kind of goes, hey, pay attention real quick, right? And so if I say, and I'm in a meeting and I don't know if I'm safe here, and I don't know if this is a good idea, or maybe I know it's a good idea, but I don't know if it's going to be well received, right? I might, because I'm a pretty, I'm not a shy person. Like I'm not a shy person. I typically have very few qualms with sharing my thoughts and ideas. But if I don't know if I'm safe somewhere, then I very well might tone that down a little bit. And I might say, it's not self-deprecation, but it's just, hey, I don't know if this is a good idea or what anybody else thinks of this. But what if, and what ends up happening is, because all of this happens on the subconscious level, everyone in that room just heard that you don't feel comfortable sharing. They may not know that's what they heard, but they heard it.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to, well, what if we did this, this, and this? And somebody goes, yeah, I don't like that. But if it's like, I don't actually know if this is a good idea or not, but here's what just popped into my head. What do you guys think about that?
Mm-hmm.
That does a couple of different things. A, like I said, it does send off a little bell that you said, I don't know. But B, you asked a question at the end.
Mm-hmm.
So that borderline requires some form of response or acknowledgement.
Mm-hmm.
And then what we also kind of have to be prepared for is if it doesn't go well, that's still the evidence that we needed. And
Mhm.
sometimes that's what we have to kind of understand is as we're going into that, I don't know if I'm safe here. The only way you're going to know if you're safe is you got to test the waters. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like that's the only way that we're really going to know that. And we just have to sort of be prepared if it comes back and we're like, oh, but I will say this too. I also think it's crucially important if we're trying to feel a situation out and go, am I safe here with these people in these environments? I really do think it's crucial that we approach it as scientists from the perspective of we cannot go just based off of one interaction. And that's really hard for our nervous systems because what's going to happen is if we don't get the response that we feel like we needed, when we try to do it again, your brain is going to go, stop right now.
Right.
We have already found out this is not safe. What are you doing? And that's when we have to side conversation with the brain and go, look, I know it didn't go well last time, but we didn't die. We didn't die. We didn't bleed out from the head. Chill out.
You sound like my husband.
Yeah, I mean, because here's the other,
Didn't
this is really
die.
interesting to me. One of my favorite parts about the brain that I think is so interesting is the brain actually does not register a real versus a non-real threat. And what I mean by that is if you were in the water and there is a shark fin, that is real, legitimate danger. Holy cow. But if you don't feel safe in an environment in a room full of people and you need to voice something, to the brain, a threat is a threat is a threat. So you might as well be in shark infested waters for all it cares. And that's why I say, even coming back to the brain and going, I know you're scared of this because last time it didn't go well, but we didn't die. So let's try it again. And then paying such close attention to what is happening, not what we think is going to happen, not what we're interpreting from our own lens. What is again, from the scientist perspective, from that data, what is happening? And because the brain's going to log the evidence one way or the other. So if we can, again, take that proactive, and I know it sounds a little bit like on the crazy side, but have literal conversations with our brain and go, I know you're just doing your job and I appreciate you doing your job, but I need you to chill out for a second so I can try this thing.
I'm wondering if there's something we could take from this, and even the one that's coming in the afternoon, that we can implement for our faculty. We communicate day in, day out from so many avenues. Our faculty are just getting a plethora of information, do's and don'ts, and where you're at and what you're doing, to where they can get that. We can remove that gap. We can create that, enhance that contribution and that feeling of belonging. So a lot of stuff, and I'm just going crazy. I'm sorry, but
No, I love it.
Great job.
No,
I
this
already
is me
messaged
all
my
the time. What you're doing right now, that's my brain all the time.
I messaged my team already. I'm like, you got to watch this video as a team. Yeah, great stuff. Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for being here. Like I said, please feel free to reach out at any point in time if you have any other questions or thoughts or whatever, even if it's just hey, we have an idea we want to try with our team. I'm certainly not the end all be all expert on everything, but I will gladly give my opinion based on what I do know. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Stephanie, for all of your expertise here. We really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Please consider nominating this presentation for an award if you'd like. I put the information in the chat, and it's on the main page. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks, guys. Bye.